Face Palm America. I'm Beowulf Rockland. Well, spring has really sprung. The weather is so nice. It's the day after Easter. If you celebrated, that's wonderful. If you didn't celebrate, that's fine too. But there's reasons for celebration just in the weather and the atmosphere. And there's cause for celebration on this podcast because John Rothmann is with us, the host of Around the Political World with John Rothmann. John, welcome back to Face Palm America. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. I almost put on my Easter bonnet, but then I decided what the heck, it was yesterday.
They're having an Easter egg roll, the traditional one at the White House today, I assume, right? I haven't seen the footage
yes.
yet.
I love the Easter egg roll at the White House. It's absolutely marvelous. And you heard, of course, the Trumpists are all upset for two reasons. One, there's no religious symbolism of this Easter egg roll. There never has been, by the way. In fact, the most religious thing they did was used to have the Easter bunny show up. I don't know if that happened this year. But the second thing is, yesterday was Easter Sunday. It was also Transgender Awareness Day. And
oh, my. Oh, goodness.
I must tell you
that's very offensive to Republicans, I suppose.
Well, to some. Not the log cabin Republicans, I don't think, but the Republicans in general. But it's really quite astounding that the religious right is now condemning the president because he celebrated Transgender Awareness Day on Easter Sunday. They may not know that the calendar does not conform to their particular proclivities, and that, in fact, March 31st is always that day. Of course, you know what March 31st is for me?
What's that?
For me, it was being in Wisconsin. I'd been with Richard Nixon all day in 1968 in Milwaukee, went back to Madison, and listened to Lyndon Johnson withdraw as a candidate for president of the United States. It was an unforgettable evening, I'm telling you.
From everything that I've read, it was a very sudden and unexpected thing. What was your response in that moment now, 56 years ago?
Well, I was with Nixon in Wisconsin, and the Johnson people were out. That is to say, support the president, the whole nine yards. Everybody was attacking Eugene McCarthy. And then I sat in my hotel room, watched the announcement with incredulity. It was stunning, the abdication of a president. So all I can tell you is I've seen it before. We may see it again. You never know. But that's what I always think of on March 31st, although I do acknowledge the fact, and I talked about it in my podcast this morning, that President George Washington said, give bigotry no sanction. And yet what we are seeing now from those who are attacking transgender fellow citizens is exactly that, bigotry. It doesn't have to mean that you're transgender, but it's shocking. And I must tell you, equally shocking to me was the Berkeley City Council meeting last week, where the hatred of Jews was so manifest. It was offensive. It was appalling. And do you think anybody really objected? No. So all I can say is whether you're transgender or you're a Jew or you're black or you're Muslim, the idea of this kind of giving bigotry permission to flourish is really shocking. And if you read Donald Trump's Truth Social, it's just filled with bigotry and it's appalling. But that seems to be where we are today. And that to me is the saddest thing of all.
It seems to me we should include in that list like the Easter Bunny, him or herself, because if there is a feeling that there is not adequate, Christian religious fervor on Easter, then it would seem to me that the Easter Bunny as a secular symbol of Easter and spring renewal would then be under attack. Could it be, John, that the Christian right is launching a war on the Easter Bunny? Could it be that we could see for a demand for the removal of chocolate, Cadbury eggs from shelves across the country this time next year?
Heresy, I say, heresy. It's like the old cry of put Christ back in Christmas. I'm a nice Jewish boy. The only thing that appealed to me about Christmas was Santa Claus. And he was a non-denominational figure.
Exactly.
May I say, I played Santa Claus on a number of occasions and always enjoyed the joy that it brought to children. And all you have to do is see Miracle on 34th Street to understand that the true symbol of Christmas was not Christ, but rather Santa Claus. Now, some would say, what a horrible thing to say. But that's the reality. Coca-Cola didn't celebrate the birthday of Christ. It celebrated Santa Claus.
That's absolutely correct, and they didn't put Jesus drinking a bottle of Coke on their advertisements for so many years. I'm with you entirely.
Now, the other big issue today is Speaker Johnson, who has now said he is going to put on the floor of the House of Representatives the appropriation for Ukraine. Mm-hmm. The far right of the Republican Party in the House, very upset about it. Will they topple Speaker Johnson? Or will they hold their noses and allow it to go through? This is the great question we will see an answer this week. I think Speaker Johnson, who were he not Speaker, would probably have opposed aid to Ukraine, is now understanding that the spotlight of history is on him. And so we have to wait now and see how that goes. But the disarray in Republican ranks is astounding. And of course, we saw in Alabama last week that the state house, the legislature flipped from Republican control to Democrat control. And the reason the Democrats won, the Democratic Party campaigned hard on the idea of a woman's right to choose. I would say that the signals are not good. And I was listening this morning to commentary about whether African Americans will vote for Joe Biden. I can tell you that there's no point in cutting off your nose to spite your face. Whatever unhappiness they may have with Joe Biden, and I think it's probably not as much as people say, it would be much worse with Donald Trump, who clearly gives sanction to bigotry.
No, that's certainly true. And I'm conflicted on many counts about Joe Biden, as you and I have discussed in the past. But I think it's clear that Donald Trump leads us down such a dark pathway as a choice for president of the United States that's just not something that we can abide. It's interesting to me. Marjorie Taylor Greene and others on the far right in the House of Representatives trying to, or in the process of ousting Speaker Johnson. It's just fascinating to me, the timing that they choose. Leading up to the election, I mean, basically they are giving the Democrats a shot at leading the House of Representatives on the one hand, or at least causing complete disarray in their ranks on what is almost certainly going to be a very close election on their part. It just seems like they have, it's fine with me because I oppose them politically, but that they just have no sense of strategy and timing. They just want what they want, and they're going to push it no matter what.
Yeah. Now, let me also make a comment about Robert Kennedy's choice for vice president. Mm-hmm. Robert Kennedy Jr. should know that who is vice president of the United States matters. Now, it's true she's a billionaire and she can give him as much money as he wants. And it's true that she paid for the ad in Super Bowl Sunday, which, by the way, was a ripoff from his uncle, John F. Kennedy, right. For which the family demanded an apology. Look, can you imagine nominating somebody for vice president of the United States whose public record opposes vaccines, she's consistent with Bobby Kennedy.
Exactly.
But let me just say, I don't begrudge Robert Kennedy Jr. his name, nor his family, but I do resent his taking advantage of his father's name to run for president. I am always reminded of the story we were talking about Johnson's withdrawal. I always remember being in Wisconsin in 1968. Remember Joe McCarthy had been the senator from Wisconsin. He died in 1957. Right. And there was a little old lady who appeared to me to be a sure thing for Richard Nixon. And I said to her, "You are voting for Nixon?" She said, "Oh, no," she said, "I'm voting for McCarthy. I've always voted for old Joe, and I'm going to vote for him again." And you laugh at it, but I think it's very important to understand the confusion when it comes to names.
Yes.
And so, but I always remember the name.
Eugene, not Joe. No, it's something I wanted to ask you about for a long time because I hadn't before I read the books on Lyndon Johnson by Robert Caro, I hadn't known a whole lot about the background of Robert F. Kennedy, RFK Jr.'s dad. And I found it fascinating, the transformation that he went under, or seemed to have gone under, during the 1960s, because during the 1950s, he was a member of Joe McCarthy's staff. And I found that fascinating. Clearly, at an earlier point in his political career, he had held some pretty starkly reactionary views, and
Well,
yet he evolved from that.
He got the job because of his father.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
Joe McCarthy
Sure.
actually dated one of the Kennedy women.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe McCarthy was a lovely man in terms of, if he wasn't drinking, evidently very charming, good looking. And Kennedy ultimately left, not because of his disagreements with McCarthy, but because he didn't like Roy Cohn.
Right.
And that was the reason he left the staff. But people do evolve. I like to remind people that if you read Abraham Lincoln, September the 14th, 1858, you will see in the fourth joint debate with Stephen A. Douglas at Freeport, what you'll note is that Lincoln himself said that African Americans were inferior. And it's a fascinating thing to remember. People's views evolve. Bobby Kennedy's views evolved over Vietnam. He had been a staunch defender of that policy of his brother, Lyndon Johnson, when he decided to change his mind, which goes to show you that people have the ability to have that flexibility. And one would think in the Republican Party that they would understand the peril of Donald Trump. Let me make another quick comment about Ronna Romney McDaniel. As you know, I defended her being hired by NBC. I had no problem with her being hired by NBC. If NBC wanted to throw away $300,000 a year, that was their business, although they would have been better off hiring Beowulf Rockland or John Rothman, to be very honest with you. But the simple reality is then they reversed themselves and they let her go. And it was because of her fellow workers who said she shouldn't be there. I thought that was shameful. I'm no defender of Ronna Romney McDaniel, but I'd rather have her front and center, being interviewed, being talked about, than what happened in this case, where she was deep sixth for her political views. I don't want a commentator deep sixth for his or her particular views.
Yeah.
I want to hear what people have to say. You know, Hubert Humphrey said it best at the 1948 Democratic National Convention, when he said the only way you expose bigotry is under the bright sunshine of freedom.
Yeah.
I believe in the First Amendment. Okay, I wouldn't have signed a contract with her for $300,000, to be very honest with you. But the point is, I hope she does give commentary, and I hope she is smart enough to understand the danger of Donald Trump and may ultimately reveal that. And by the way, if she did, she'd be hired immediately, because that reflected the political trend. One of the things you and I have done is always included a diversity of opinion. I think that's very important.
No, it is important, and I completely understand. Frankly, I don't understand why a network like MSNBC would have hired her to begin with, and I completely understand why they got rid of her. I don't, if I happen to be watching MSNBC, I don't particularly want to be like confronted with that viewpoint unless I go and deliberately select it out.
Sort of like what you get on Fox, with a continual diatribe and high paid salaries for people like Sean Hannity and Mark Levin, who frankly reflect that same point of view.
Well, they do, and they control. You see, I don't know. I believe that the current system where everything is siloed, and I understand this kind of plays into that. It obviously doesn't work particularly well. But then on the other hand, you're not really going to get much on the other side from a Fox News, not in this day and age, now that, Alan Colmes has passed from the scene and others. You don't get the same kind of balance. And, in a perfect system, I would love to see Ronna Romney McDaniel be represented. But I can understand why they wanted to see her go, because he doesn't fit in with the network from the perspective of the kind of network that they put out there.
But it should be point counterpoint. You mentioned Alan Colmes.
Right.
Nobody remembers Colmes, but it was Hannity and Colmes.
Yeah.
Because they had different point of view. Or nobody remembers Crossfire on CNN. Yeah. When you had a Pat Buchanan against a liberal Democrat.
Well, there was at various times. I remember, because I remember watching that show in the mid '90s, and at one point it was Michael Kinsley, who was later of Slate, who was a really sharp guy, and later it was I'm trying to remember the guy. I've met him in person, and I can't remember his name.